Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ramona and I run a faith-based YouTube channel with the hope of edifying the body of Christ. And today I want to speak into a kind of topic that has been close to my heart. It's based on a sermon that I heard in a Sunday service in my own church. Without further ado, let's get into it. It is raining. So the topic that I want to discuss today is the pain that we experience and the providence of God, and how these two things are very linked. And it's based on the book of Ruth. And I just want to give a bit of background about the book of Ruth. So for those of you that will be familiar with this book, this will be like refreshing your memory. The general idea of the story is that there is a woman called Naomi, and her husband leave Bethlehem to go to Moab because there is a famine. She also has two sons, and they end up marrying and taking on two Moabite women, which is something that the Israelites had been told not to do. But out of the desperation, I suppose, of the famine, they left Bethlehem to go to Moab, where they thought probably that they would be able to find some food. And this is significant because Moab was a city that was despised by God, because the Moabites were enemies of the Israelites. And if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll also be able to see that the Moabites were descendants of Lot, and Lot had children through incest. And so they were not favored in the eyes of God. And so it was a very tragic thing that Naomi and her husband decided to go to Moab, where there was a lot of idolatry. So this is the kind of the setting of the scene. They moved to Moab. They end up staying there 10 years, and then during this 10 years the husband of Naomi dies, and not only her husband but unfortunately her two sons as well. And so her daughters-in-law are left without husbands, and she is also left without a husband. After a time they decide to go back to Bethlehem because they get word that there is food again in Bethlehem. So they trek back there, but Naomi says to her two daughters-in-law that they should turn back to their own family, which is kind of strange that her being an Israelite, she advised them to go back to Moab, where they would worship other gods. Of course, one of the daughters-in-law, she turns back to Moab, but Ruth doesn't. Ruth is a very faithful character, and she's described to be very faithful. And when Naomi tells her to turn back, she says, "Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me." So she's very loyal, very faithful, and she moves in faith, and this is an example to us, I guess. And so then obviously Ruth ends up going to Bethlehem. That's where she gleans the fields and meets Boaz and ends up getting married to Boaz. And the significance of that is that she actually becomes the lineage of Christ. So it says here that Salmon begat Boaz, and Boaz begat Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. And then in Matthew as well, it talks about this lineage too. And it's Matthew 1 verse 4. Salmon begat Boaz by Rahab. Boaz begat Obed by Ruth. Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king. So you see, Ruth was part of the bigger plan of Jesus and the genealogy of Jesus, which is just amazing to think that Ruth, when you think about it, she was not only a Moabite, but she was a pagan. And so a pagan was grafted into the works of God and played a very important role. So it shows the grace of God, and it shows God's great love towards us. But what I've really taken out of this story, and what I think is very important here, and how this has spoken to me, is that there's a lot of pain and tribulation that we go through in the world when we're apart from God, but also sometimes even when we are with God. And we wonder sometimes, why do we feel that pain? Why have we been left to deal with that pain? Or maybe sometimes we don't even know how to process the pain that we're feeling from different experiences in life, and we think there's no purpose in it. But whatever pain we feel, God has a purpose in it. And although our pain is great, God's providence is greater in that. I think that this story has really hit home for me, because there was a time in my life when I was feeling a lot of pain, and I went through a period of depression when I was younger, in my 20s. And I think that I was really reaping the rewards of the life that I was leading. You reap what you sow. I was sowing to destruction, and my life became that. It was a downfall of a relationship in my life that really disappointed me and hurt me and upset me. And when I came to Christ, I was maybe thinking about some of that pain, and I was processing that pain still from that time. And I was wondering what plan God had in all of this. And when I heard the sermon and when I really studied the book of Ruth, I was able to see that, yes, there's pain that we feel and there's times when we don't understand why, and we bring it before God. And I felt like this was an answer to my prayers and me bringing my pain before God, that we feel a lot of pain, but it doesn't end there. God has a plan through that pain. And you have no idea sometimes how God can take you from where you are and He can bring you to a land with a purpose. Because as I always say in the verse that I keep always quoting, is that God has a plan to prosper you, to give you a future and a hope. That's what He says in the book of Jeremiah. So God doesn't want to hinder us or harm us. He has plans for us to prosper us. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it, is what He says in Isaiah. So God has a plan for us. He has a destination for us. And the pain that we've been through, the past that we've experienced, and maybe the shame that we're dealing with from the past, God has a purpose. And so we don't need to glorify those things. We don't need to put those things up on a really high pedestal and almost idolize those things and look to those things and think, this is hopeless. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm trying to process at the moment, but I'm not able to. I'm carrying this massive amount of pain and I have nowhere to set it. And I just want to encourage anybody out there that is feeling like that, that God has a purpose in that pain, and God is working a providence in our lives. It doesn't always appear it, but God is always at work. I'm sure that Naomi and her husbands didn't know what God was doing, and I'm sure that even Ruth herself didn't understand it. I would even say even Boaz didn't know about it, but they became the lineage of Christ. And so through their pain, through the famine, through everything that happened to them, all that pain that they were dealing with, and the circumstances, the dire circumstances of not being able to put food on the table even, or to feed themselves, death in the family, God had a purpose through all of those things. I encourage anybody to really look deeper at what God is really accomplishing, because sometimes we get so stuck in a certain moment or a certain time and we don't recognize that God is always moving. If you can imagine inside of a clock, there's all these moving parts and they're constantly moving and ticking that clock. Well, that's also God, it's a picture to me what God is like. He's constantly working, always doing something, always accomplishing something at His own speed and His own rate, which to us can seem very slow sometimes, but nevertheless, God will bring everything to fruition and He will complete everything in His own divine time. And what He's working in your life can be amazing. For example, so I went to get my nails done. I went to a nail parlor, and as I was sitting there on the chair, it was a walk-in type of nail parlor, so you couldn't make an appointment. You just had to sit, and whenever you were next, you were next. So I sit in that parlor anyways, and there's two people there. They're a couple. It was actually a woman and a man, believe it or not, that were doing nails. And they were playing music off of their phone. And as they were playing the music, the next song that came on was a song that was in Romanian. And then straight away from that, I knew, okay, they must be Romanian. And I am also Romanian. And so because I knew that, when I approached the girl, when it was finally my time to have my nails done, I asked her, where are you from? And she said Romania. And then I started to speak to her in Romanian. And I said, well, is it okay then if we speak Romanian? And she was more than happy to do that. And so we started talking, and she was doing a part of my nails, and then I would go over to her partner and he would do another part, and then I would go back to her. They were working together like that. So it meant that I got to speak to the two of them. And they started asking me my story. Well, how did you end up in Northern Ireland? And so I said to them, actually I became a born-again Christian, and my husband was from Northern Ireland, so we decided to move here. And so when I was kind of querying them, like, what do you think? Do you think there's a God? Her partner said, of course there's a God. Without Him, there would be nothing. And so I kind of got the understanding that they had a reverence and respect for God, even though that they weren't maybe going to church or anything like that. And interesting enough, he said that he was of Orthodox background. She was kind of, I think, Orthodox background too. But they said that they've got a lot of people in their family that are, I don't know how to say this in English, but they are a certain kind of denomination in Romania that are very conservative Christians. They're quite good Christians in their ways, but they're very conservative and very strict in their ways of life. They generally always wear a little head covering, the women do, and they wear long skirts and things like that. Kind of a resemblance to the Amish a bit. And so a lot of their family members were part of this type of a church. They're very sound doctrinally for the most part. They would be classed as evangelical Christians. So a lot of their family members were from this kind of denomination. And so I think when I came and I was speaking to them and we started talking about different things, I even mentioned to her, yeah, I used to be out clubbing and doing all this kind of stuff, but I realized none of it was no good, and I came back to God. And I was really just trying to bring forward to her that a life with God is so much better and so much different than a life before that was just so hopeless. And I think that I got my point across, and I think she understood. And even herself, she said, I think we should be married. I would love to be married, and it's not right. And she said, in the Bible, it's considered harlotry. So she knew all this stuff. And I think the whole reason why I'm telling you the story is because I have often kind of complained and cried out why I've been brought here, because I think I maybe was unable to understand the plans of God, and maybe a lack of faith on my part as to what God is doing in His providence. But God has a plan in everything that He's doing, and I'm starting to see more and more that God has brought me here with a purpose. And sometimes you go to do your nails, something so simple, and an opportunity is presented to you to speak into somebody's heart because you speak their language and because you're from their country. And so God can put you in a place where He can work through you, and to know that the Almighty God is working through you and He's using you as a vessel is absolutely amazing. And so, as I always say, don't despise where God has put you, and don't misunderstand the providence of God and the plans that He has, because God brings you somewhere with a purpose and a plan. And you best believe that if you are where you are and you've left something behind, you've left the land behind, there's a purpose to it, because even the Israelites, they were brought out of Egypt, out of captivity, into the wilderness, through the wilderness, and into the promised land. So God had a destination for them. Their problem was that they didn't have faith. So don't be like that. Don't be like the Israelites. Learn from their mistakes and go through this wilderness period and believe that God is working and that God has a providence and a plan for you. I just want to mention one verse that I think really speaks into this. So the first verse is Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. So we know that God, for those who love Him and who believe in Him, God has a purpose for all of those people. And so wherever you are, God has a plan for you, and God is working His providence in the same way that He was working His providence through Ruth, and she had no idea. She was a pagan. She had no idea. Another verse I want to mention is in Ephesians 1 and verse 11. In Him also we have obtained an inheritance, being predestined according to the purpose of Him who works all things according to the counsel of His will. God is always working according to the counsel of His will. I mean, think about that. We don't always see it, we don't always understand it, but God is always working. Even in times when we sleep, when we close our eyes, when we are really engaged in something in the world, and we don't recognize that God is working, He's still working. He's always doing His work. He's always doing His job. With that said, I just want to wrap this up by saying that God is always providentially working in our lives, whether we see Him or whether we don't. He's always doing exactly what He wants to do, and He's doing it exactly how He wants to do it. And so don't despise where you are, don't despise your surrounding, don't despise where God has placed you to work through you, but be faithful and pray to God and ask Him to reveal these things to you. I hope you guys have found this encouraging. If you have found value in this, please give me a like and do subscribe, and I'll see you next week, hopefully.